Yeah. The magic kind, of course. Was introduced to plant medicine 10 years ago to deal with my depression. Always in my head talking, telling me what I was and what I wasn't. And for the first time, I had like a ego dissolution where I was like, that was the moment that really changed me. You get to a place in your life where you're blocked by something, whether it's a trauma, whether it's your emotions, your ego, not being able to express yourself. And then I feel like psychedelics are a way to tear down that wall and see what's beyond it.
Trying to be a human and relate with people in the digital age that we live in. The mental landscapes of people are changing and the psychology of people is changing. Honestly, I just wanted to make it because I'm sad, and it's my sadness that connects me with my community and my fans.
What makes this story unsettling is not any one headline, but the way the fragments begin locking together the moment you stop viewing them as isolated celebrity moments. In October 2024, during a 45-minute press interview, he reportedly answered question after question by reciting lines from Twilight, even pulling handwritten quotes from his pocket mid-conversation as if he had arrived with a script only he could see. Around the same period, he told Billboard that the older he gets, the more frightening it feels to simply step outside, admitting that even leaving his bedroom can feel like a challenge.
2024 case study of the long-term effects of young love is really a snapshot of my mental state currently when it comes to trying to be a human and relate with people in the digital age that we live in. The mental landscapes of people are changing and the psychology of people is changing. Honestly, I just wanted to make it because I'm sad, and it's my sadness that connects me with my community and my fans. I'm hoping that I can leave enough information behind for psychologists of the future to look back and be like, man, what was really wrong with this guy? Like, there's some serious stuff that's wrong with him. Like, what is it?
And suddenly the image shifts from eccentric to far more complicated. Then came the EP, a project he described as being made in direct collaboration with his therapist, through tears, with the almost haunting hope that one day psychologists might revisit it and decode what he himself could not explain. People online keep brushing it off as quirks, as performance art, as the behavior of a famous kid raised in an unreal world. But that explanation starts to feel thin once the pattern keeps repeating, because when you line it all up, it no longer feels random. It feels like someone quietly signaling distress in ways the public was never meant to fully understand. And that is where this story takes on a darker edge, because the question stops being whether he is unusual and becomes whether he has been unraveling in plain sight for years. This video digs into all of it. The marriage his parents allegedly kept hidden for years.
Dog, it's hailing in Paris, bro. Ice is falling from the sky. It was cold. I knew it was cold, bro. Ice is bouncing off of God. Do you see this? Rain doesn't, bro.
The rumors and contradictions that have followed the family for decades, the Scientology school, the Diddy connection, and the growing online speculation about whether he may have been exposed to circles no young person should have had to navigate. The clips are public, the interviews exist, the statements are documented, yet almost nobody has laid them side by side long enough to see the full outline forming in the background. Start in February 2026, and the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. On the red carpet for the Could Have Been Love Season 2 premiere, when a journalist asked about his collaboration with designer Jaden Smith and casually mentioned Kanye, he looked up, turned around, and walked off without a word.
With Jaden Smith to design Yeezy footwear with Ye. What are y'all cooking up? Guess we'll never find out.
Leaving behind a silence that somehow said more than an answer would have. What makes that moment stranger is that it echoed October 2022, when he publicly distanced himself from Kanye after the YZY Season 9 controversy, suggesting that this was not spontaneous awkwardness, but a trigger that had already existed beneath the surface.
I'd never really given much thought to how I would die, but dying in the place of someone I love seemed like a pretty good way to go.
Okay, so I've been tagged in that video a lot, and it's because Jaden Smith is giving an interview to Complex, and that's a quote from the 2008 film Twilight. But what I feel like people aren't talking about enough is that, first of all, everything he says in that interview, I think, is a movie quote, but also Twilight gets quoted twice.
How does that think about that?
You know, it's the fluorescence.
He's gonna be a huge fan.
Then only weeks later in Paris, cameras caught him reacting to Hail with childlike disbelief, laughing and shouting in a way that seemed funny for a second until it was placed beside everything else and took on a completely different tone. Add in the $47,000 miniature dollhouse bag at the Louis Vuitton show, the surreal on-camera tour of its tiny balcony and owl, and suddenly even the playful moments start to feel oddly detached, like distractions orbiting something much heavier. By the time that bizarre October 2024 Complex interview arrived, described by the reporter as one of the strangest conversations he had ever conducted, and Jaden later posted that all the weird things people had seen were him genuinely believing he was acting normal, the public was left staring at a possibility far more uncomfortable than celebrity oddness. Maybe this is not a persona at all. Maybe what we have been watching is a years-long trail of clues from someone trying to hold himself together while the world kept mistaking the warning signs for entertainment. And once that possibility enters your mind, every clip feels different. Every smile looks slightly heavier, and every strange moment begins to carry the kind of weight that is very hard to ignore. What makes that moment feel heavier than it first appears is the realization that a 27-year-old isn't just being expressive. He's carefully circling something he can't quite bring himself to say out loud. When someone repeatedly hints at being blocked by trauma without ever naming it, it creates a strange tension.
Why did the relationship fracture?
Oh, why it fractured, that's a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think by the time we got to 2016, we were just exhausted with trying. I think we were both kind of still stuck in our fantasy of what we thought the other person should be.
Like a sentence that never reaches its final word. And that's where the focus quietly shifts toward his environment, because the story doesn't begin with him. It begins around him, shaped by forces he didn't choose. In June 2023, standing on stage at the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver, he openly credited his mother, Jada Pinkett Smith, as the person who introduced the family to psychedelics.
Mushrooms.
Yeah.
The magic kind, of course. Was introduced to plant medicine 10 years ago to deal with my depression.
Always in my head talking, telling me what I was and what I wasn't. And for the first time, I had like a ego dissolution where I was like, that was the moment that really changed me. You get to a place in your life where you're blocked by something, whether it's a trauma, whether it's your emotions, your ego, not being able to express yourself. And then I feel like psychedelics are a way to tear down that wall and see what's beyond it. Doing it guided with people that are professionals, I feel like really increases the chances of having that mystical experience.
Describing it as a gradual ripple effect that eventually reached everyone. On the surface, it sounds like a personal journey toward healing, something Jada herself has discussed publicly through her own experiences with plant medicine. But when you listen closely, there's an unspoken gap between what is shared and what is withheld. Because while he speaks openly about breaking through emotional barriers, he never once defines what those barriers actually are. And that silence starts to feel intentional rather than accidental. It raises a quieter question that lingers beneath the surface. Why express the process so vividly, yet avoid the origin entirely? That omission becomes even harder to overlook when you consider the environment he was growing up in, one that, by Jada's own later admission, was far more complicated than it appeared.
The hardest job tonight, Javier Bardem and his wife are both nominated. Now, if she loses, he can't win. He is praying that Will Smith wins. Like, please, Lord. Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Uh-oh, Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay? Okay.
What makes this part of the story linger uncomfortably is not just what happened, but the position it placed him in, caught between private realities and public narratives that never quite lined up. Carrying a family secret for years is one thing, but living inside it while the world celebrates a completely different version of your life creates a kind of quiet pressure that doesn't easily fade. And layered on top of that, Jada's own revelations added even more complexity. Her admission of struggling with dark thoughts, her use of ayahuasca as a way to pull herself back, and her candid criticism of Will's grand gestures all paint a picture of a household that was far from stable behind closed doors. None of these details exist in isolation, and when viewed together, they begin to form an environment that feels emotionally unpredictable, even if it was never described that way publicly. Then, in 2019, things took another turn when Will and Jada staged what they described as an intervention for Jaden, concerned about his physical state while following a vegan diet, noting how drained he appeared, how his energy seemed to fade. But what stands out isn't just the concern, it's the decision to film and share it, turning what could have been a private moment into public content, raising a subtle but important question about boundaries in a family already living under constant visibility.
It's a situation that I consider private.
You just feel like it ain't really nobody's business. Yeah. But now Black Twitter has claimed it as their business.
You and I were going through a very difficult time.
Yeah.
And we decided.
I was done with your ass.
Yeah, you kicked me to the curb.
I was done with you.
Yeah.
Marriages have that, though. Marriages have that.
Yeah, we broke up.
And then what did you do, Jada?
Well, I think from there, as time went on, I got into a different kind of entanglement with August.
An entanglement?
Yes. Yes.
A relationship?
Yes, it was a relationship, absolutely. The only person that could give permission in that particular circumstance is myself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But what August was probably trying to communicate, because I could actually see how he would perceive it as.
Because when personal struggles become something the world can watch, the line between care and exposure starts to blur in ways that are difficult to measure. Then comes the moment most people remember, but rarely examine beyond the surface. In 2020, during a now widely discussed episode of Red Table Talk, Jada confirmed her relationship with August Alsina, a conversation that quickly turned into a viral cultural moment, largely reduced to a single word: entanglement. But beneath the humor and headlines was a detail that quietly shifted the entire context. August wasn't a distant acquaintance. He was someone Jaden himself had introduced into the family. And that single connection changes the emotional perspective entirely, because it reframes the situation not just as a public controversy, but as something far more personal. August had previously spoken about feeling isolated, dealing with emotional struggles, and navigating difficult health challenges, describing a period of his life where stability was hard to find. And it was during that time that this relationship developed, a detail that has led many observers to debate the dynamics involved, often from very different angles. Some, like comedian D.L. Hewley, question how the situation might have been perceived if the roles were reversed, suggesting that public reaction could have been very different under those circumstances.
When they were talking about, well, he was sick and he was mentally sick and he was emotionally sick. Now, that's predatory. Let me tell you something. If you are sick, like he's physically ill.
Yeah.
He's emotionally, and then the damage you do. Like, this dude was talking about killing, right? So it isn't just you having an affair or whatever you do. It's that in your wake, because you felt bad, and that dude was behind it.
Still is.
And you can't tell me.
But what often goes unspoken is Jaden's vantage point, bringing someone into your home, someone you trust, only to watch that relationship evolve into something far more complicated, all while the outside world reduces it to a meme. That contrast alone creates a kind of emotional dissonance that's difficult to ignore. And even now, years later, there's a lingering sense that the full impact of that moment hasn't really been explored, especially from the perspective of the person who stood closest to it. And just when it seems like the story couldn't become more layered, another thread begins to surface, one that has followed Will Smith for decades in the form of persistent rumors and speculation about his personal life. Dating back to the 1990s, there have been ongoing discussions, claims and counterclaims about his identity and relationships, none of which have ever been definitively confirmed, yet never fully disappeared either. In 2016, actress Alexis Arquette made public statements that reignited those conversations, adding fuel to an already long-running narrative that had existed mostly in whisper and tabloids.
Did he try and like kiss you and stuff? I saw you guys on Ellen and you were like a lot.
All the time.
So even on set, he wasn't even trying to
No,
like.
not on the set. He wasn't trying to kiss me, but after the set, he'll try to kiss me or anywhere else.
Whether grounded in truth or not, the effect of such speculation is undeniable. It creates an atmosphere where perception and reality begin to blur, especially for those closest to it. And for Jaden, growing up in a space where deeply personal topics were constantly debated, joked about, or questioned in public, it introduces yet another layer of complexity to an already intricate environment. Because when your family's identity, relationships, and private struggles are continuously interpreted by the outside world, it becomes harder to separate what is real from what is being projected. And that raises a final, lingering thought that refuses to settle. If so much of his life has unfolded under scrutiny, shaped by narratives he didn't create, how much of what we're seeing now is truly his? And how much of it is the echo of everything that came before? By October 2023, when Jada released her memoir, Worthy, a completely different layer of the family dynamic came into view, one that had been hidden in plain sight for years. She revealed that she and Will Smith had been living separately since 2016, maintaining what she described as completely separate lives, while continuing to appear publicly as a united couple. On paper, it reads like a private marital decision, but when you shift the perspective to Jaden, the timeline becomes far more revealing. He was 18 when that separation began, meaning that through some of the most formative years of his life, he was navigating a reality that directly contradicted the image presented to the world. Imagine watching your parents share red carpets, interviews, even defining public moments, all while knowing the truth behind the scenes didn't match what millions of people believed. And here's where the tension subtly deepens, because maintaining a secret like that isn't passive. It requires constant awareness, constant adjustment, a kind of quiet performance that never fully switches off.
Don't be bad at everything.
Shit. Yeah.
You was an all right actress, you was a terrible wife, you was a bad mother. You was who knew that your husband was doing things to boys and did stuff to your son and you ain't do shit about it. Bilal told me everything.
They're good friend who.
Bilal told me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jada, he told me that you knew Will was f***ing your child. Yes, he did. Wonder why he left that out of his Tasha K interview.
In that interview, he said a lot. He said a lot.
He said everything but the thing that was important. That he know that Will Smith raped Jaden, he raped Bashir, and he raped Neek Mills, and you know it, Bilal.
Then came the 2022 Oscars, a moment that played out in front of the entire world, where Will publicly referred to Jada as his wife, reinforcing a narrative that, by her own later words, hadn't been true for years. Jada would later admit she was confused by that moment herself, which adds another layer of contradiction that's difficult to reconcile. And somewhere in the middle of all of this was Jaden, fully aware of both versions of reality, expected to carry that knowledge without ever addressing it publicly. Reports later suggested that both he and Willow felt a sense of relief once the truth finally surfaced, but even that relief raises its own quiet question. What does it feel like to finally stop protecting a story that was never yours to tell in the first place? Because once you start looking at it this way, the idea of trauma he refuses to name doesn't feel abstract anymore. It starts to feel like something shaped over years, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice that the pieces were never as disconnected as they seemed. What makes this stretch of the story feel increasingly difficult to dismiss is how the tone subtly shifts from speculation to a pattern of moments that were all captured in plain sight, yet rarely examined together. Over the years, there have been scattered claims and cryptic remarks, like the resurfaced allegation that Will's first marriage ended under unusual circumstances, or Tisha Campbell's pointed social media post that many interpreted as more than coincidence, but those remain firmly in the realm of rumor, impossible to verify and easy to brush aside individually. Yet, when attention turns to what's actually on camera, the conversation becomes harder to ignore. In multiple interviews, Jaden himself openly described situations where Will would try to kiss him on set or in public, framing it as something that made him uncomfortable, even asking him to stop, while Will consistently framed it as harmless affection. On their own, those clips might be dismissed as awkward family dynamics, but repeated over time, they begin to leave a different impression, one that viewers interpret in very different ways depending on what they believe they're seeing. Jaguar Wright later referenced similar footage in a 2024 interview, connecting it to broader claims about the environment surrounding the family, claims that remain unproven, yet continue to circulate because of how often these moments resurface. And then there's Jaden's own identity, something he has always expressed fluidly and without strict labels, from wearing a dress to prom to making bold on-stage statements that blurred the line between sincerity and performance. But even there, a subtle contrast emerges. While Will's affection appears frequent and, at times, overwhelming on camera, Jada's public interactions with Jaden often seem noticeably more distant, a difference that viewers have pointed out repeatedly without ever fully understanding what it means. That contrast doesn't prove anything on its own, but it adds another layer to a story already filled with unanswered questions. Then the lens widens, and suddenly this isn't just about one household anymore. It starts to overlap with another familiar name. Jaden Smith and Justin Bieber have shared a close friendship since their early teen years, not just industry acquaintances, but a connection that has lasted through some of the most formative and turbulent periods of their lives.
16.
You're not ready. Slow down. Let's slow down, Jess.
Okay.
Let's slow down. Okay?
One step at a time.
But yeah, the keys is yours. When you get 16, you good to go.
I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Then when you get 18, you get the house. You get the mansion.
Okay. I get the mansion.
When Bieber posted in 2024 calling Jaden one of the most important people from his youth, it sounded heartfelt, almost nostalgic, but also carried a weight that's difficult to define. And when a backstage video from Coachella showed the two reconnecting, Jaden surprising him, Bieber lighting up instantly, the moment ending with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, it was initially framed as something light, almost wholesome. But context has a way of changing how moments are perceived. After Diddy's arrest in September 2024, that same clip resurfaced, and suddenly people weren't just watching the interaction. They were reinterpreting it through everything else that had come to light, especially older footage of a teenage Bieber appearing uneasy in certain high-profile environments. That shift in perception doesn't confirm anything, but it does reveal how quickly narratives can evolve once new information enters the picture. What stands out is how often the same themes appear: early fame, intense scrutiny, visible emotional strain, and years of the public trying and failing to fully understand what they're seeing. And when two people share those patterns so closely, the question naturally forms, even if no one can definitively answer it, whether their bond is rooted not just in friendship, but in experiences they've never chosen to explain. And then the story takes another turn, moving away from individuals and toward the system surrounding them, where things become even more layered. In 2008, Will and Jada launched the New Village Leadership Academy, enrolling both Jaden and Willow in what was presented as an alternative educational environment.
And, you know, part of Epstein's thing was to get people in precarious situations, and then you have this footage that you can use against them to be able to have your way with champions of the industry and able to control policy.
You know, it's all right, architectural.
But the school later drew scrutiny when reports surfaced that its curriculum was heavily influenced by study methods associated with Scientology, leading to growing concern among parents before it ultimately shut down. Will and Jada denied any formal ties, yet former Scientologist Leah Remini publicly stated that she had seen Jada involved within the organization, adding another thread to an already complex narrative. On its own, that might remain a footnote, but when placed alongside broader claims from figures like Big Homie CC and Jaguar Wright, who have spoken about alleged systems of influence, control, and reputation management within elite circles, the conversation shifts into something far more unsettling, even if much of it remains unverified. These claims often reference the idea of powerful individuals being placed in compromising situations.
Spy on each other's people for each other. You know, if they don't want to make it look like they're stalking one of their, you know, defectees, they'll ask somebody from TMZ to do it for them. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that out loud, allegedly. Harvey, they farm it out, make it seem like it's just paparazzi stuff when they're actually doing investigation. And Scientologists, they're relentless. A lot of people farm out their gaslighting work to them for a profit. That's LA.
Not as isolated incidents, but as part of a larger pattern. An idea that has circulated for years without ever being fully substantiated, yet refuses to disappear. And here's where the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. Jaden growing up within these overlapping worlds, exposed to high-level industry spaces from a young age, while his parents maintained connections across multiple influential circles. Then following Diddy's arrest in 2024, Will Smith unexpectedly addressed the topic during a live performance, distanced himself without being prompted, a moment that on its own might seem insignificant, yet stood out precisely because it wasn't asked for. And that detail lingers, because unprompted statements often reveal more than carefully prepared ones. By this point, the story no longer feels like a collection of disconnected moments. It starts to resemble something structured, something layered, where each piece alone is explainable, but together creates a picture that is far more difficult to neatly define. What makes the ending of this story so difficult to shake isn't the claims themselves, but the way they refuse to settle into a clear conclusion, no matter how many pieces you line up. By the time voices like D.L. Hewley began publicly questioning the dynamics around Jaden, framing it as a situation where boundaries may have been blurred in ways that are still being debated, it had already become more than just a passing controversy, because when you step back and look at the full sequence, it doesn't present itself as a single incident, but as a chain of moments that seem to echo each other in uncomfortable ways. Jaden introduces a friend into his world. That connection evolves into something deeply complicated, and the aftermath becomes public spectacle rather than private resolution. At the same time, his closest peers share eerily similar trajectories, growing up in overlapping circles that have since come under intense scrutiny, while institutions and environments tied to his upbringing raise their own questions without ever offering definitive answers. None of these elements alone confirm anything, but together they create a pattern that people can't seem to ignore, no matter how much time passes. And just when it feels like you've reached the edge of what can be explained, another detail surfaces, pulling the narrative back into uncertainty. Because at the center of all of this is not a theory, not a rumor, but Jaden's own words, admitting that for years, what the world perceived as strange behavior was to him an attempt to feel normal.
The world we're in right now, it's really hard for y'all to discern what's real and what's true, you know? And I've been seeing y'all memes and stuff. People be making memes. I see the memes. I see them now. Some of that stuff is funny. Some of it's funny. But I haven't addressed any of this publicly, but I just want to say this very clearly. I don't have shit to do with Puffy, so y'all can stop all them memes. I can stop all of that bullshit. I ain't been nowhere near no damn freak off. So I do enough of my own shit. Don't be putting me in other people's bullshit. Nah, but I haven't said that publicly. I just said y'all the first time. I usually don't respond to dumbass stuff, cause it's like people, it's so many things, people say so much stuff, but you know, that one, your memes was doing too much. Y'all was having me mad.
That single admission reframes everything, turning moments that once seemed performative into something far more introspective, even quietly distressing. Describing himself as blocked by trauma without ever naming it leaves a gap that no outsider can fill, yet it's that very absence of detail that keeps the conversation alive. People often expect clarity from public figures. But what happens when the most important part of the story is the one thing never fully said? That silence becomes its own kind of signal, one that invites interpretation but resists conclusion. And while it's easy to draw lines, to connect dots, to build a narrative that feels complete, the reality is far less certain, because documentation can show you moments, but it can't always explain meaning. Still, the emotional weight is difficult to dismiss. Years spent searching for something internally, turning to music, to expression, to anything that might translate a feeling that words couldn't quite capture. And that raises a quieter, more human question beneath all the speculation. What does it feel like to live with something you can't fully explain, while millions of people try to explain it for you? So the question that lingers isn't as simple as whether someone was right or wrong, or whether one theory outweighs another. It's why this story continues to resurface, why it refuses to fade the way most internet narratives do. Maybe it's because it sits at the intersection of fame, family, identity, and silence, where every answer seems to create two new questions. Or maybe it's because deep down, people recognize that something about it feels unresolved, like a conversation that was interrupted before it reached its most important point. Whatever the reason, one thing remains clear. There are still gaps in this story, still moments that haven't been fully understood, and still a sense that what's visible might only be part of a much larger picture. And until those missing pieces are either clarified or laid to rest, the curiosity surrounding it won't disappear. It will only evolve, reshaped by each new detail that comes to light. Comment below with what you think is really going on. Leave a like if this gave you chills. And subscribe, plus turn on notifications if you want to see more Hollywood secrets